Hello there. I guess the question you should be asking yourself is, if you analyze all the numbers from the elections, do they make sense? Now I found a source. The source I'm basing everything off of is the American Presidency Project. You can look that up if you wish. But that's where I'm getting most of my numbers from. They analyze a lot of these numbers, and it goes back to about 1828, but granted, the numbers don't really start till like 1932. And then decent numbers don't really start till about 1968. So, for the most part, we're not going back that far, so we don't need numbers that go back that far. But the real question we're trying to ask ourselves today are, do the election numbers actually make sense? Short answer is no, they don't. And we're going to go over real quick what numbers are kind of off and what doesn't make sense and what's just not realistically possible. So the first thing I want to look at today is the fact that, let's see, in 2024, so this election year, granted this site doesn't have the numbers for this election year, so I had to look all these numbers up independently and estimate a guess on some of them based off of statistics from the increases from previous years. But that was only for the estimated eligible voters, which doesn't really matter in our analysis today. So in 2024, the number of registered voters went down 7 million from 2020. 7 million registered voters we lost from 2020. Now, is a decrease in registered voters uncommon? No, it's not uncommon, but it doesn't happen a whole lot. So 1976 was the only other time we had a decrease in registered voters. And even though there was a decrease in registered voters, there was still an increase of actual voters. So even though the registered voters decreased by 1 million, there were still 4 million more votes casted. So is it uncommon? No. And another thing to bring up too is not only did the registered votes decrease by a lot, like I said, the only other time in history was in 76 where it decreased by 1 million compared to the 7 million this time around. But what also went down was the number of voters. So the number of voters also went down. The number of voters in 2020 was 158 million. Now, in 2024, that went down to 146 million. Now, is that uncommon? Not necessarily. But you have to look at what other cases that is presented in. Okay, so if we're looking at a decrease in actual voters, the last time that happened was when Obama was reelected in 2012. Obama had an amazing turnout in 2008, was reelected in 2012, had a decrease in the number of voters, still won, so it's happened there before. It's also happened with Clinton when Clinton got reelected. So again, on a reelection where the sitting president was reelected, the number of votes on the reelect went down. Granted, in 1992, Clinton had a ridiculous year. In fact, 1992 is the only other year you can really compare 2022. Because that's when the numbers, as far as voters, just went crazy. In fact, it's the only year where the averages just don't line up. So, if we were to compare that to 1992, what really doesn't make sense in the end is that 22 million people didn't vote. Out of the registered voters that were available, 22 million people did not vote in 1992. And honestly, that's a pretty average number if you look at it. Pretty much it goes from 20 to about 30 million people that don't vote, that are registered. And that's a pretty common pattern. In fact, when Richard Nixon was elected in 1968, only 13 million people didn't vote. Only 13 million. Compare that to 2020, though, only 10 million people didn't vote. And that's where the numbers don't make sense. The numbers don't make sense that only 10 million people did not vote in 2024, which is a number that's never been hit before. That doesn't make any sense. When Nixon, like I said, when Nixon was elected in 68, only 13 million people did not vote. When Obama was elected for his first presidency, which as far as modern times goes, was probably the most hyped up and anticipated presidency of our modern era, because we were going to elect for the first time in history a black president. So even voter turnout then, 15% of people didn't vote, which is still an amazing number as far as the number of voters that didn't vote, as far as how low that is compared to all the other years. You compare that to 2016 when Trump was elected for his first term, 21 million people didn't vote. Before that, Obama on his re-elect year, 24 million people didn't vote. When Obama was elected, 15 million people didn't vote, so a lot less. But then you get to 2020 when only 10 million people didn't vote. And never in history has that ever happened. Now, you can say maybe it's because of the pandemic, more people were home, more people maybe had the opportunity to vote because they weren't doing anything. I think that's a lie. I think that's a bold-faced lie. I don't believe that's true whatsoever. And it even gets crazier when you go to 2024, this year. This year, only 15 million people didn't vote. So the same as the year that we elected Obama, we have 15 million people that didn't vote, which again, I already brought up, was an extremely low number. And the only other number lower was, again, 1968 when Nixon was elected. That's it. Besides that, we come close to the 15 million, I guess, in 1976 when Carter was elected. But that's about it. And you got to figure in 1968 when Nixon was elected, there was a lot of stuff going on that year. You're in the middle of the Vietnam War, which people aren't happy about. They want to get out of. On top of that, you have Martin Luther King gets assassinated. 2 months after that, RFK gets assassinated. So you're in a year where the U.S. is in just chaos. They're desperate for change. They're in the middle of a war they don't want to be in. You have all these influential people getting assassinated. So yeah, 13 million people that didn't vote, a low number for that in 68, that makes sense. Same thing when Obama got elected. 15 million people didn't vote, a low number. That makes sense. It was a pivotal time in our history where we elected a black president, for the presidency. And that's, that and at the end of the day makes sense. And it's even supported further by that on his re-elect when you see that 15 million people that didn't vote all the way dropped to 24 million people the next term that he ran for. So, yeah, the year we elected, somebody new, somebody different, it makes sense for that number to be that way. And then the following, presidency goes back to its normal number. Even like I mentioned in 68, at 13 million people that didn't vote, the very next presidency when he gets reelected, that goes up to 21. It goes back to the normal range. Even when Carter was elected in 76, 16 million people didn't vote. Next year after that, it still went back up to 19 million people didn't vote when Reagan was elected. And then when Reagan was reelected, 24 million people didn't vote. So as you see, on all of the re-elect years, over 20 million people didn't vote. And that's true all the way up until 2024. 2024, you're going to tell me 15 million people didn't vote, which is an astonishingly low number. Not as low as 2020, where somehow 10 million people didn't vote. But somehow 15 million people didn't vote on a re-elect, where Trump was actually, Trump was going to be re-elected, or Kamala was going to get her first term as president, or, re-elected to an office, whatever. She was never elected in the first place, but that's irrelevant. What matters is the fact that we're hitting these numbers that have never been hit before. In 2020 is where it just doesn't add up. You're going to tell me 10 million people didn't vote? I don't believe that. That number has to be a lot higher. And what doesn't make sense is the fact that now the number of registered voters dropped 7 million. Not only that, it's the first time in history that not only did the registered number of votes drop, but also the number of voters dropped. The number of voters dropped by 12 million. Which is, like I said, that's not uncommon. In Clinton's re-elect year, his numbers dropped quite a bit. But on his re-elect year where his numbers dropped quite a bit, you still have, 20 or 31% of the population that didn't vote. So even when the voters dropped, when the number of voters dropped, what was it, 8 million? You still had 31 million that didn't vote. You're telling me now that the voters have dropped 12 million, with the registration also dropping 7 million, which again has never happened in history, and yet the voter turnout was only 15 million that didn't vote. So what I'm saying is, if you're calculating the numbers from 2020 to 2024, that's when things start to not make any sense. If you analyze numbers, you realize there's always a pattern. No matter what, there's always a pattern. Once in a while, you're going to get an anomaly like Clinton in 1992 to 1996, where you went from a crazy 104 million voters down to 96 million voters. Those anomalies happen once in a while. At no point are they happening back to back. So the fact that these anomalies are happening back to back doesn't make sense. Now, you take that as you will. Numbers are what the numbers are. The numbers don't lie. You can take that with a grain of salt and just say, hey, somehow, some way, the number of voters went down and the number of registered voters went down. And you could also say that somehow, even though all that went down, we still had 15 million people that didn't vote, which is, throughout history, the second lowest turnout, or third lowest turnout? Third lowest, as far as people that didn't turn out ever? It doesn't make sense. The numbers don't add up. So, at the end of the day, are you paying attention to the numbers? I don't know. But if you care about the numbers, ask yourself, do the numbers make sense? Are these numbers adding up? The answer is no. They don't. But that disparity in the number of people actually that don't vote, that's the craziest disparity. That's the one number out of all this that doesn't make any sense, that doesn't add up. So these are my thoughts and opinions based on the actual numbers that we have. If you find any discrepancies, let me know. I'd love to know about it. Until next time, catch you later.